Hey there, Penn State football fans. It's Bob Flounders. It's time for another episode of the Blue White Breakdown. And boy, we got lucky. I have a very special guest on our podcast. If you need to know something about the SMU Mustangs, I have found the guy. And yes, he is part of the Advanced family. There is that. I want to welcome to our broadcast Jacob Richmond of Lone Star Live, another Advanced site down in Texas. SMU, if you guys don't know, is kind of in the Dallas, Texas area. For any of you Penn State fans that are not really up to speed, but Jacob and I are going to do a couple of podcasts leading up to Penn State's December 21st game with SMU uh, at Beaver Stadium. I'm pretty sure it's going to be freezing. I'm not positive, but I think it will be. But I just want to, Jacob, welcome to the show. Um, anything you want to tell the Penn State fans about? Because I highly recommend Penn State fans you follow him on social media on Twitter and X. It's at Jacob Jacob capital H Richmond Richman. He is the guy for SMU. Welcome to the show, Jacob.
Thanks so much, Bob. Appreciate you having me on. Yeah, I think it's actually a lot of fun having Penn State fans probably learning where SMU actually is, and SMU fans learning where State College is. They're like, it's part of it's where in Pennsylvania. I think they're always like,
What
well,
does
we know
SMU
Pittsburgh,
stand
and
for again? I don't know. I think Eric Dickerson went there. I'm not even sure where they are.
exactly. So no, I think it should be a little kind of fun clash of fan bases and two very different schools, but finding their way into their first CFP at the same time. I think it's really exciting. I think SMU's had a really unique season.
Yeah.
I think obviously both teams really want to keep going in the CFP. It will mean a lot to both programs, but I think the story to this point has just been really intriguing, and I'm excited to get into it with you.
Yeah, Jacob, just a little background on you, maybe. I know that you have some East Coast roots. You are down there covering the Mustangs, but you have some roots to Big Ten country. If you just want to get into that a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Dallas, so I've grown up in this area, but I did my undergrad at University of Maryland. I know most Penn State fans might be clicking off at this point because they don't want to hear anything from someone who went to Maryland, but got to cover Big Ten for a couple years while I was a student, including Maryland football in the 2021 season. So yeah, even though I haven't been able to keep the closest eye on Penn State this year, I've certainly had my eye on Big Ten country for a while.
Yeah, so 2021, you were there for the Jahan Dotson game. Do I have that right? It was a close game for a while, and then he had a long touchdown pass late. I think they won by like 17, something like that.
No, I think I'm trying to remember. I don't know if it was the Dotson game. It was one where I think it started a little close, but it got out of hand pretty quickly.
Yeah,
I just
that's
think I
it.
remember it was one of their, I think, bigger letdowns that year. I think it was that year. Maybe I'm mixing them up. I'll admit some of the Maryland seasons they've had recently, it's hard to keep track of
Sure.
which
Yeah.
one was fully mediocre and which one was terrible. So
Yeah. Sorry, I've been doing this a long time. So whenever you say a year, I immediately click to, well, what did Penn State do against them that year? And I think
yeah,
that was,
I have to
if
look
it
back
was
at that
2021,
one.
that was it. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. Look, Penn State fans want to know. They just want to know all anything you can share about these SMU Mustangs. I looked at their schedule. I looked at their losses. Um, they look like they are a handful when they're playing well, and even in defeat, they go down swinging. Looks like a team that has been tested this year, and they've responded to many of their tests, and they very nearly came from way back to beat Clemson in that first year in the ACC in that title game.
Yeah, I think the number one thing you can learn about this team is that they're going to be competitive no matter what. There's last year when they were still in the American Conference and they had some big opponents like Oklahoma. They kept it interesting for a while, but there was never really a point where you were like, "Hey, it looks like they could really make a push here." This year, it's been a little different, where they're in every game. If they're not leading in every game, they're not going to let a lead build up too much. They're a very physical football team, and that's something the coaching staff has stressed a lot this year, is that they are not interested in a game getting out of hand quickly, and they don't really make enough they haven't made enough mistakes this year for it to really happen. They've certainly had their stumbles, as you mentioned. I think early on, people kind of disregarded them because they went and played at Nevada week 0, which ended up being the byproduct of Vanderbilt canceling a series with them, about
Mhm.
a month before the season or so, a month or two before the season or so. And they didn't look great in that game. I won't pretend they did. But to go on the road in week 0 against a team that was with a new head coach, very different personnel, like they still came out with the win there. But as you've watched this season, uh, they've been able to grow and grow and grow on both sides of the ball, and it's just made it so that even when, if you look at that Clemson game, I mean, obviously went down early, which is very rare for them this year. They're not staying down for long.
Yeah, yeah. Let's just start with the head coach. He seems like a guy that's got it together. I know. I see he's got a pretty nice background too. He's got them confident. He's got them developing. What can you tell me about him?
Yeah, so Rhett Lashlee, he's from the Gus Malzahn coaching tree. He worked with him at Auburn when they won their national
Yep.
championship. He was spent time at Miami. Before Miami, he was with SMU as offensive coordinator under Sonny Dykes before making that jump to Miami. And then when Sonny Dykes left for TCU, he came back to SMU, and he's really stressed, developing this program around Dallas. And I think it would be foolish to not recognize the role that NIL plays in that. SMU, obviously, I think many listeners will know that they're not exactly strapped for cash. And just the between and that's not his focal point, but the fact that he's been able to recruit at a much higher level than SMU has been able to for the
Right.
past 30 years, since 30 40 years since the death penalty, has really evolved what they've been able to accomplish and be able to go after the guys they want and develop this team with a good set of coaches. I know it's maybe looking a little far ahead, but one of the most important things for Lashlee and this coaching staff moving forward is if they're able to keep everyone at
Right.
SMU, convince them this is a big time program that people want to be at, because there's some assistants, some coordinators who are definitely in line for head coaching jobs, and
Right.
those moving pieces are going to be pretty important for their sustained success.
Bob Flounders here on the Blue White Breakdown, talking with Jacob Richman from Lone Star Live. He is the SMU beat writer for the football team. Penn State and SMU are set to collide December 21st, noon kick at Beaver Stadium. Jacob, I love noon kicks. Fans get upset about them. I would, if they could play at 8 a.m., I'd be happy, just so we can get to everything we need to get to. But it's going to be an early kick on a Saturday. And one of the things I wanted to get to with you is I've noticed. So anytime a team can go on a run where they win 9 games in a row, I think it's significant, right? And that's I believe that's what SMU has done. They've actually along the way prevailed in some close games over some former Penn State coaches. I know that Penn State fans remember Bill O'Brien. He's now the head coach at BC. I believe SMU won that game, I think, by 10. Manny Diaz is at Duke. He was the Penn State fans love that guy for what he did for the defense for a couple of years. You guys beat them, I think, by 1 point. So the journey for that 9 game winning streak, there were some really impressive wins, comfortable wins, but there were also some close games. And I think teams get better, right, when they persevere in those games. When you talk about their journey this year, Jacob, what are the games and maybe what are the moments that stand out to you about this SMU team?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, pretty much the biggest one I think you have to look at is the BYU loss. I think that's kind of
Okay.
that's the turning point of the season. So before that game, Preston Stone was the starting quarterback. He quarterbacked SMU for the entire regular season last year. He's from the Dallas area. He was a 4-star recruit. He was really important part of kind of establishing the success that they're
Sure.
having these last 2 years. He broke his leg in the regular season finale last year,
Hmm.
leading to Kevin Jennings taking over in the American title game and winning it in his first start. Um, Fast forward to the preseason, Preston Stone's finishing up his rehab. Kevin Jennings has been quarterback number one essentially for the past handful of months during spring practice and whatnot. And they entered into the season with a kind of a real with the real quarterback battle, to be honest. Even though I think everyone was like, well, it's Preston's team, he's the veteran. The coaching staff knew that Kevin was, not far behind. So once they traded off snaps those first couple games, once they hit that BYU game, I think is when they realized, partially due to the loss, that Kevin was the guy that needed to be leading this offense moving forward. SMU's O line was still really struggling to contain pressure. BYU, I think, was able to sack. I think
Yeah.
Stone had 4 drives and they sacked them 4 or 5 times on those drives, and it was impossible for them to move the ball. So that game, which ended up being incredibly close, um, it came down to a couple plays. There is a real possibility they had an interception that ended up getting tackled at the 2 yard line. If they punch that in, it's a totally different story we're looking at right now. So,
Hmm.
anyway, after that game, Kevin Jennings was announced as the full time starter, and that's when they began their 9 game run, starting with their rival TCU, who they pretty much demolished. Offensively, I think the score makes it look a little closer than it actually was.
Okay.
And then continuing that on to Florida State, and they certainly hit their bumps and bruises. I think the ones you mentioned right there, Duke and BC, were kind of really important ones to see. Like, is this a team that's going to fold when they're really facing adversity? Uh, Duke was Kevin Jennings' worst game. I think he had 6 total turnovers,
Whoa.
and that's very rare for him. He was fumbling the ball. Duke's defense was getting after his passes. It was certainly not his best game, but the SMU defense came up so big in that game, and I think that's almost the underrated part of their season is how
Yeah.
good their defense has been. It can really lead the way, win a game, when that offense isn't moving. But as we've seen, that doesn't happen, too often.
Yeah. Uh, I'm glad you shed some light on the quarterback picture, as Penn State fans continue to try and find out more about SMU, and that seems like a pivot point for the season, and it was a loss, ironically. But sometimes that's the way that's the way that it goes. Um, you mentioned their defense, and what I noticed was, Penn State, their defense, when and they're typically good when they're typically good because they're disruptive, right? And that was when Manny Diaz was here. They generated turnovers, tackles for loss, and sacks in flurries, and they still do that this year. They have two very, very talented edge rushers. One who's going to go really early in the draft, and they replaced two that got drafted that were really, really good in Chop Robinson. Yeah, momentarily I'm blanking on the other guy. He's going to come up into my mind, but before that, I just wanted to ask you about the disruptive defense that SMU has, because I'm looking at those stats with the quarterback hurries, with the tackles for loss, with the interceptions, and they have a ton of them. So that leads me to believe that maybe these two defenses aren't all that different.
Yeah, I think SMU's defense is although they get a lot of those pressures, they do get a lot of those turnovers. I find that that's not necessarily their bread and butter. It really is just that stout, like it's the behind the run defense. It's
Okay.
about it's about forcing offenses to be very one note. I think they got a lot of their turnovers early on. I actually feel in the last couple games that hasn't been the most important part. The most important part has been how do we keep their offense from not getting first downs,
Right.
and then all goes back to their defensive coordinator Scott Simons. He's a semifinalist for the Broyles Award. He really has revolutionized what defense can be at SMU, because even in those years where in the past 10, 15 years where SMU made a little bit of noise, it was always behind a quarterback. When they had Shane Buechele, Tanner Mordecai, those guys, it was behind these big offenses, big players
Yep.
that put up enough points to get the wins. It's very different now. When he came in, I think his first year, SMU was still, a bottom 20 or 30 defensive team in the country. And they were like, instead of trying to build a defense around the players we have, let's build the defense we want. That is so fundamentally sound that it's not going to matter too much. And then they start bringing in all these transfers and getting the size of a real power program that they didn't have in the past, and it's made it really difficult for teams to open up the field. So I think there's certainly a chance that they force turnovers and get
Mhm.
sacks, but with the pressures, they don't blitz much. They I don't know where they actually rank nationally, but their edge rushers are so solid that they don't have to bring the extra pressure to still be able to get past O lines and get to the quarterback, which is that's I feel like that's more their bread and butter.
Penn State fans, I told you I blanked on that. It's Adisa Isaac. It was bugging me. I did not want to leave you guys hanging. I did remember his name. He was a heck of a player. I think he got drafted by the Ravens, but that was the other guy last year with Chop. This year, it's Deni Dennis Sutton and Abdul Carter. Abdul Carter is ferocious, and I'm sure you're going to learn more about him, and I'm sure the coaching staff will talk about him. But we're continuing on here on the Blue White Breakdown, just getting to know a little bit more about SMU with Jacob Richmond of Lone Star Live. And we're gonna do another podcast that gets a little bit more specific. But one of the things I wanted to get to with you in this podcast is, so they're coming up to State College, and State College in December, late December, is not really that warm. It's often very windy. It's actually not very easy to get to, which is a whole other. Penn State fans know about that. But I guess my question for you is, with SMU playing in front of 110,000 people in a challenging weather environment, assuming that it is, in your mind, have you heard anything? Is that a big deal? Do you think is that going to be something that SMU is really going to have to adapt to with the crowd noise, and it's going to be a whiteout even though it's in the day? But or is that just is this SMU team as it's kind of gone on this year, Jacob, meeting a lot of challenges? How I guess my question is, how big of a deal do you think that is?
I don't think it'll play too important of a factor for them. I certainly Coach Lashlee talked a little bit about it in some of his prior press. We're still waiting to get to talk to players, so we'll see what they think. But I think there's honestly just an excitement for them. The players they love going into road environments. It eggs them on. It makes everyone's against them, and they like being the underdogs. So I don't think it'll bother them too much. They've had some decent experiences over the last couple of years. They went on the road to Oklahoma last year.
Mhm.
Obviously, not an easy environment. Their last two, these last two championship games they've played, the AAC one was at Tulane, and this was, I think, kind of one of their peak, crowd moments. There's this post their Cotton Bowl win and Willie Fritz's last game, and then going out to Charlotte this past week. Obviously, it was a pretty pro Clemson crowd.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm interested to see if they say anything in particular, if they're planning anything to kind of get ready. But I don't think they'll be too bothered by it. And last year's bowl game was at the Fenway Bowl against Boston College, and it was raining and like 30 degrees or whatever. So the weather wise,
Got it.
I'm not looking forward to it, but I think I think they'll be they'll be able to lock in pretty quickly.
Jacob, if I could give you any advice for your trip to Pennsylvania, the middle of Pennsylvania and State College, I would say whatever you do, just make sure you bring long johns, um, and just in case. I mean, I there's been times I think I've double long johned it just because it can get pretty cold when the wind is howling. Hopefully, it won't be. Maybe we'll get lucky, but it could be a little chilly. So that's my only advice to you. I wanted to close this podcast, and once again, Jacob Richmond of Lone Star Live, SMU beat reporter. You got to follow him. Follow him on all social media accounts. You'll learn more and more about this SMU team. And yes, SMU is in the Dallas area. Penn State fans, if you're not familiar with it, I wanted to close with this. Having covered the team so closely, Penn State fans are going to look at the SMU record. They're going to look at the game results. They're going to look at the stat leaders. They're going to learn a lot about that running back. They're going to learn a lot about the quarterback, and they're going to learn a lot about the defense. Is there one player maybe on offense and on defense that's maybe under the radar, and maybe the stats, or maybe he's an offensive lineman or a defensive tackle? Are there one or two players on this team that you really, really think kind of have really been difference makers and key cogs for this team that maybe the stats won't reflect that?
Yeah, it's interesting on offense because they're not an offense that has as many eye popping numbers, except for maybe Rashard Smith at running back, who I
Yeah.
think will be the obvious one people look at. They love to share the wealth in the passing game, but I think Roderick Daniels is the guy. I actually don't even I can't remember off the top of my head if he's leading in receiving yards or whatnot, but he is an incredible story, and he is one of the most versatile players to be on the field. He's going to be returning punts. He's going to be, catching the ball. He's might be playing running back. He was a starting running back for them one week this year.
Mhm.
And this is he's not a very, large receiver. He's a small guy. You see teams running out those wildcat formations with the big bulky receivers, the Debo Samuel kind of idea.
Yeah.
He's different. He's a smaller guy, elusive, but anytime he's got the ball in his hands, he knows how to do something special. He was the one who scored the touchdown at the end of the ACC championship game. It's just even in games where he doesn't pop off on the on the stat sheet. His
Yeah.
ability to make something special happen is just really unique, and I'm excited to see what he does in a really big time game again. And then on defense, it's tough because I think that again it's a defense that's very well rounded.
Mhm.
I think Elijah Roberts is who's one of their edge rushers is one of
Mhm.
the most underrated defenders in the country.
Okay.
But I really think the guy on defense to watch for is Jonathan McGill. He's one of their safeties. He's a veteran. He transferred from Stanford 2 years ago. After a couple years out there, he's from the Dallas area, and he's the real leader of that defense. He has a great head on his shoulder. He's a great player to hear speak. And then when he's out on the field, he's undersized. He's not again a lot of SMU's kind of difference makers. They're not your prototypical athletes, but they just make things happen. You see him go and tackle a 230-pound receiver. You see him make these big plays that a guy of his size you wouldn't expect to be able to
Mhm.
do, but he just makes it happen, and he's a guy to really watch out for in the field, even though there's other all conference guys that are around him and going to be making plays.
Penn State fans, this is why we brought Jacob on the podcast. You just heard him mention Roderick Daniels, a wideout who's maybe not the biggest wideout, but he can impact the game in a lot of different ways. I believe he had a punt return for a touchdown early in the season, but they use him in a variety of ways. Penn State fans, if you remember the Oregon game and what happened in that game, Tez Johnson, their receiver, who is not the biggest guy, absolutely took a blowtorch to that defense. I think he had 11 catches for 180 yards and a touchdown. Penn State could not handle him. He's a game changer, and whatever they needed to play, that's who they went to. It sounds like at least in terms of impact, this guy Roderick Daniels is maybe in that vein. And if he's anything like Tez, they better tighten up the secondary because he was the guy, him and Dylan Gabriel, who just completely confounded a very good Penn State defense. So that's a guy that I'm going
Yep.
to remember, Jacob. I appreciate that.
Rhett Lashlee had a funny line earlier this year that he's played everywhere but left tackle. And when we asked him if he wanted to play left tackle, he said he'd do it if he got asked.
That's
So
awesome.
I'd enjoy seeing the sub 200-pound Roderick Daniels lining up against Abdul Carter or
Oh yeah,
something. But, I don't think we'll see that in
he's probably quick enough. The problem is when Abdul goes to power, it might be a little bit of a problem for him. But it sounds like he's a scrappy guy, so I wouldn't put it past him. Hey Jacob, uh, I really enjoyed chatting with you here, just kind of getting to know the SMU Mustangs. Great info, great detail. Appreciate it. Looking forward to seeing you come up here. Don't forget about the long johns. We're going to be good, but we're gonna wrap this episode up with Jacob, and we're gonna come back. We're gonna have another one where we kind of get into the specifics of the game, maybe some matchups, players to watch, possible storylines that could impact the game. Jacob, it's been a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to talking to you on the next one.
Thanks so much for having me.